checking his injuries and stuff. They said, "Oh, but by the way, what do you do?" And Ed said, "Well, I used to be a jazz guitar player."
Oh,
Yeah. Anyway, he came back and he sounded like Ed, man. Like there's a testament to someone. I did a little tour of Spain, a very short tour with Neil Swainson, Fabio. You remember Fabio? He got us the tour. Jerry Fuller was on drums.
Fabio Miano.
Yeah, yeah, I know because I know you logged some hours with him too. Anyway, so I remember. So I'm sitting at Jerry and I went out the day before, and anyway, we're hanging out at the bar, and Ed walks into the bar at the hotel we're at, and I said, "Hey, how you doing? How you feeling?" Because obviously, jet lag and all that. He says, "Well," he was always like, he always sort of weighed his words. He came in and kind of goes, "Well, I don't have a guitar." And we said, "Well, what happened?" He said, "Well, it didn't make it on the plane for some reason." And we thought, "Oh shit." So the next day is our first gig in this we were in this beautiful little city called, I'm sure you played there, Alicante.
Alicante.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's like the
Anyway,
Boston of Spain. All students.
oh, is that right?
Oh no,
Okay.
no, no. I'm sorry. I'm thinking Salamanca.
Oh,
Alicante is where Fabio lives.
yeah,
That's right.
that's right. Yeah. Anyway,
The beach is there.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
right.
Okay, I had it confused. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so Neil and I went with Fabio, and we drove all around Alicante trying to find Ed a guitar because he didn't have one for the gig. So for the first gig, he didn't have a guitar. So we found 5 or 6 different guitars. They were all crap. I said he can't. There's no way. We finally found this thing that was sort of playable, you know. And anyway, we went back to him. We said, "This is what we found." I said, "If you want, you can use my guitar. It's in good operating order." And he said, "No, no, I'll play that guitar." So, and I always tell my students this thing because sometimes people say, "I just bought this new $3,000 guitar," and I say, "Funny, it doesn't sound like a $3,000 guitar, when you play it." So, anyway, we had our eyes shut when we played because we didn't read charts or anything. And guess who he sounded like on that shitbox guitar? He sounded just like Ed Bickert.
Yeah.
And I never get tired of telling that story. You don't need a high-end guitar. You need a guitar. You need an instrument, whatever it is, whatever the instrument. It's got to be in decent operating shape, of course.
Well, as my friend Tim Price used to say, it's not the arrow, it's the Indian. It's the Indian, not the arrow.
Or it's not the plane, it's the pilot.
Yeah. There's a
But I
story.
mean,
We had a
yeah,
bass player too with Chet, young bass player, good bass player. We were
yeah,
both in our 20s, and he had this plywood bass, and it was a real cheap bass. He was trying to save up his money so he could get a
a
decent
decent one.
instrument,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
up to then he didn't have it, and he was always bitching about that bass. He said, "Oh man, if that bass, it just holds me back. I can't get what I want on it." He said, "I'm suffering through it. I just need $1,000 more. I can get a good bass and this and that." Well, George Mraz came by,
Let me guess, and he played it,
totally drunk with Walter Norris one night, and like,
and
and
he
just
sounded just like George
sounded
Mraz.
just like George Mraz, and
That's it,
the
man.
bass player never again said a word about his bass not working. That was so. There's
That's
that
so
kind of
true.
thing. And people say, Charlie Parker could play anybody's instrument. It was, he would do it. And I say, yeah, they say he didn't even have a saxophone, yet he'd come and play great. I say, man, the mouthpiece. He'd pawn the horn. He didn't pawn his mouthpiece.
Ah, okay.
So
Yeah,
with the right mouthpiece,
yeah.
you can play anybody's.
Plus his conception. I mean, God.
Yeah, and I'm sure he could have played anybody's horn, but
Yeah,
you know
yeah.
that. So, so how did you meet Ed? Ed was the. I thought of Toronto. Let me give a little preface to this as sort of a guitar town in some ways. There's
Very much so. Yeah.
because I mean, were a number of cats that really played well. There was Ed, and there was you, Lorne, and there was
Well,
Reggie Swagger and
yeah,
Ted Quinlan, who
yeah,
had come from the West Coast, but he really settled in Toronto.
yeah. That's
A
right.
guy
Yeah,
like Roy Patterson was there too.
yeah, yeah.
I may be leaving some cats out. Michael
Well,
Ocapinte,
yeah, yeah.
Ocapinte
David
later.
David Occhipinti.
David Ocapinte, yes.
Yeah, yeah, and Joey Goldstein's quite a good jazz player. I've known
Joey
Joey
Goldstein could
forever.
play,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and but before all of us were on the scene, there was Lenny Bro
Oh, yes.
and there was Sonny Granich, right? And so the three, it's interesting. Those three guys sound completely different from one another, and yet they all settled in Toronto for a long time, you know. And I met Ed. There was this club in Toronto when I was about 16. Yeah, it was 1970. I approached Ed Bickert at this jazz club called, it was a vegetarian restaurant called Meat and Potatoes. That was the joke. It was a vegetarian restaurant. And Ted Moses would play there, and Sonny would play there, and various other people. And Lenny would play there if he wasn't too high. I went
You got to hear Lenny quite a bit in Sunny.
Oh yeah, in Toronto, yeah, mainly a bit at Bourbon Street. This is when he moved to the States, and then he came back for a bit. And then when he was actually living in town, I heard him a few times at George's Spaghetti House. But one time, I asked Ed for lessons. I went up to Ed. He came in with his wife Madeline at Meat and Potatoes. I was 16, and I was just sort of starting to get into jazz a little bit. I was still a rock and roll guitar player. And I went up to Ed and I said, "Hi, Ed, my name's Lorne. Do you teach?" And he just said, Ed goes, "Well, no." So I just said, "No, I don't teach." But he recommended someone for me to check out, who turned out to be someone that he went to a decade or 2 decades earlier. Probably, yeah, because Ed had 20 years on me. So his name was Tony Braden. So I went to Tony Braden for about a year and a half. And then I didn't really get what I was looking for from him. He was a great teacher, but what he was teaching me, I just didn't find very practical at the time. And the ironic thing was, many years later, Jeff Bickert, Ed's eldest son, did some YouTube videos or Facebook videos, and he put them online. And Ed mentioned how he went to this guitar teacher named Tony Braden, and he said to Tony Braden, after about a year, he said, "I'm not really getting what I'm looking for." And Tony said, and Ed had ridiculous perfect pitch. You know, they used to say about Ed, he could hear paint dry. You know, he could hear anything. If you just went, shh, he could put a chord to it, you know. It was unbelievable. Anyway, so Ed went to Tony for a year, and he told Tony after this year of lessons, "I'm not really getting what I want." And Tony said, "Well, why don't you just get some jazz records and figure it out on your own?" And Ed just said very nonchalantly, and that's what I did. You know, so Ed listened up to all these big band records, and anything he heard, he could replicate. And he was able to figure out on the guitar how to take piano voicings or big band horn section voicings and distill them, like whittle them down to the essential notes. And he was the first guy that I heard on the jazz guitar doing that. And it was, to me, it was revolutionary. But I just thought, when I happened to see that interview, I thought, my musical story is the same trajectory as Ed's, except it was 20 years later. Because I asked Ed for guitar lessons, and he didn't know who to recommend. So he thought, "Oh, well, Tony Braden is this guy I went to." So he recommended Tony, and then I went to Tony, and I did the same thing. I was getting so much into Ed and trying to lift some of the stuff that he was playing, that I decided to focus on him. And I gave Tony Braden, his guitar teacher, a pass as well. So it was like the same kind of.
You know, this is one of the fascinating occurrences within our music, that there are a couple of instances where I've had that kind of thing.
Yeah.
For instance, Gilly Coggins, piano player, who
I know
was
the
on
name, but
the first records of Miles, where he does "I Waited for You," Tempest Fusion, in the early Blue Note records of Miles.
yeah.
He's the piano player on a lot of that.
Oh, okay.
And he was the piano player in the neighborhood, the Harlem neighborhood that Sonny Rollins, Jackie McLean, Bud Powell, Richie Powell, that whole
Sugar Hill or something.
Sugar Hill neighborhood that those guys grew up in.
Right.
And you know, Jackie told me how he and Sonny Rollins would go over to Gilly's house and play when Gilly had an accident and was very ill and finally passed away.
What happened to him?
He couldn't drive. He was old, got old, and he was the worst driver. And he was going the wrong way on a one-way street.
Mm-hmm.
And he ran into somebody. And I don't think the person died, but they were hurt very badly.
Ooh, wow.
And Gil smashed up the car.
Right.
And he ended up in the hospital for close to a year, and then passed away. He didn't make it, but he was he was a wonderful piano player, and he loved ballads. And he was a former alcoholic. Actually, he was sober when he had his accident, but he was just, the thing was, he years before, Hot O'Brien had a club called St. James Infirmary, and it was owned by Hod and the great pianist. And Gil would come in every day around 4:00 when Hod opened the club to have a little taste, because he was drinking in those days, and to play the piano, because Gil loved to play, and he would play ballads. So I also, often at 4:00, I knew Gilly would be in the club, and I was working there with Chet 2 days every week. 2 days, we did Wednesday and Thursday, steadily, and sometimes I'd do a weekend or sit in. It was a little home away from home, but in the afternoon, I'd go and sit in with Gilly, or just play ballads with Gilly, because he was a wonderful ballad player, and we play mostly ballads and have a nice relationship with each other. So years later, when I met Jackie McLean, we talked about Gilly, because he was going to go visit Gilly in the hospital. He said, Gilly is the first guy who taught me to play ballads.
Wow.
And I said, wow, he was really not the first, but the second. The first guy in New York that I actually went to and played ballads with every day. And Jackie said, isn't that funny? He said, we were doing the same thing with the same cat, but 20 years apart.
It's the same thing, man. It's a parallel. Same. Yeah.
Yeah, so I found that in a lot of people doing these interviews is interesting, because a lot of us have had those kind of interesting parallels in our lives. In fact, one other thing, I asked Barry Harris once, who taught you? Where did you pick up these? He says, well, there was a bass player in Detroit named Jimmy Glover. And Jimmy played with Dinah Washington later and did that, but Jimmy knew a lot about harmony, and he showed me the basics of the basics. He said, he's a little older than me. I said, that's weird too. Because in Miami, when I was 16, how old was I? Yeah, 14, because I hadn't studied with Phil Woods yet. I would sit in with people, and sometimes Jimmy was on bass, because he had moved to Miami.
Oh, wow.
And Jimmy told me, you sound good, and you got a good ear, and you got a conception. He said, but you don't know nothing about harmony. And I was not going to learn about harmony, because Ira Sullivan was my hero. And they said Ira was completely intuitive. So I wanted to be like that. I thought maybe it wasn't important to know changes, which is how you think when you're 14.
Yeah.
And Jimmy stressed the importance of harmony. He said, I'm going to show you one thing. He said, you see, this is called the tonic. That's the key you're in. And the number 5 chord leads to the 1 chord. And this is now your first lesson in harmony. And that's all he ever showed me. But it was funny that it was the guy that showed Barry.
Yeah, that's wild, man. Yeah. Well, another parallel too, I asked Ed for guitar lessons when I was 16. And then in 1983, I did my first gig with him. That was 13 years later. Larry Kramer and Jane Bennett put on this series of concerts, and they asked me if I wanted to play a quartet gig with Ed Bickert. And it was Kieran Overs, one of his first gigs on upright bass, and Jerry Fuller. And for me, it was like dying and going to heaven. 2
guitars and then?
Yeah, 2 guitars, bass, and drums. So. Oh,
wow.
Yeah, anyway, for me, it was just, like playing with my hero, It's amazing. I learned so much, and then that was the beginning of me playing with him from 83 to, I guess, about 91. So it was quite something for me. It's like I tell people, like, I'm the luckiest guitar player in the world. I played with Ed Bickert for about 8 years.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah.
It's like I went to the University of Ed Bickert.
Well, to tell people where you can hear, Ed made some renowned records with Paul Desmond that are probably his better known records. What other things would you suggest for, if nobody's heard Ed Bickert, where should they?
Well, he did a lot of recording on the Concord label. He became an artist for Concord. Now I don't know how easy they are to find, but there might be things on Spotify, or if you do an online search, you might be able to find CD copies and stuff. But he did a great record called Bye Bye Baby. He did another record, Third Floor Richard. He did another one, the Ed Bickert Five, that was recorded live at Bourbon Street, where all the Paul Desmond live stuff was recorded.
Okay.
Don Thompson recorded all that stuff. There's a box, I don't have it, but there's this box set of 5 or 6 CDs of Ed playing with Paul Desmond from Bourbon Street.
I did hear some of that. I remember they did that too.
It's incredible. And then also, Ed did something with Frank Rosalino. I'm not sure how you'd find that, but you can do. I'm sure people can do an online search. That was also done at Bourbon Street. And then my Desert Island record that really turned me on to Ed in a major way was the studio album that they did on CTI with Paul Desmond, and it's called Pure Desmond.
Oh,
With Ronnie Kay and Ron Carter, and it's all standards. And Paul Desmond even says in the liner notes, this is really Ed's album. It's like really features Ed heavily.
wow.
Paul Desmond said he would turn around on the gig and count the strings on Ed's guitar, because the stuff he played, he sounded like a big band on the guitar.
Wow.
And stuff like that.
And another heavy smoker, Paul Desmond, and
Oh yeah.
you know,
Absolutely.
you've
Yeah.
quit. I see. You used to smoke cigarettes too. You and I.
Yeah, I know. You and I used to. Yeah, we go through probably a carton's worth on a gig or whatever.
I think we did. You know, we'd be
Yeah.
sitting there, and
Yeah.
we always had a cigarette going, both of us.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah, like playing with Ed, and being able to hear him, way before I had the opportunity to play with him. I got to tell you this funny story. So one night I went to George's Spaghetti House, and I got a table right in front of the bandstand. I went extra early. And I asked Ed, I said, do you mind if I record you? I had this little cassette player. He said, no problem. So I put it on, and I was sitting, and I said to myself, okay, and I've told this story before. I said, okay, tonight's the night. I'm going to crack the code. I said, it can't be that hard what he's doing. So I sat there and I said, I'm going to watch his left hand on the guitar, the chording hand. I'm going to watch him. And I'll never forget. So he's playing all these great grips, shapes on the guitar. And I'm looking at it going like, no, I don't know that one. No, don't know that one. And this went on for about 15 minutes. He played.
I don't know this. What you're saying? I don't know that one.
Yeah, I don't know. Don't know that one. No, I've never seen that one before. I didn't know any of them when he was playing. And while he was connecting the chords, there's this beautiful melody happening on top, like a chord melody. Like the way Bill would voice out a melody on the piano. It was that heavy. And eventually I just thought, you know what, I'm just going to shut my eyes and listen. I said, this is a waste of time, me trying to go like this and analyze what he's doing. I thought, this is not the way to learn music. So it was a very important lesson.
Wow.
But it was based on the fact that I just didn't, it was like he was speaking Swahili to me metaphorically, and I go, I don't know. I could hear and appreciate what he was doing, but it made no theoretical sense to me. And he didn't know he was another guy that didn't know anything about theory. Like he would just, because he had such perfect pitch.
I mean, he knew the names of the chords.
Yeah, he knew everything. I mean, like I said, if he could. One time I was playing with him at the top of the Senator, and an ambulance was going by outside, or a fire engine, and he just copped the sound of the siren, and he just played it. It harmonized in his solo as he heard it. It's just remarkable, and so musical though. I mean, apart from his hearing ability, he was like, Ed didn't have any licks. His solos were just these little fragments of different tunes, almost like woven together like this beautiful tapestry. He wasn't like taking licks and rehashing them and stuff like that. It was all melody.
I have to check him out more seriously. I really didn't. I don't know enough about him.
Yeah.
So that's good. That's a good thing for me to do.
Yeah, and he could really dig in and play like eighth note lines too. He did a recording with Sonny Greenwich, and it was originally a CBC radio show, but it was released. Don Thompson, I think, released, and it was called Days Gone By, and they were just playing some standards. And Ed was at the top of his game, man. He was playing like really aggressively and just beautiful. Digging.
And that was before Sonny got into his modal Coltrane.
It was sort of around the same time. Like Sonny sounded okay on the record, but the thing about Sonny was he never practiced between gigs. And apparently they used to say if you wanted to go hear him on a week-long engagement, go the third or fourth night, because the first couple nights he's just going to try and like relearn how to play it was pretty rough because he never
Really, that's
practiced. Yeah. Meanwhile, Ed was working all the time in studios and doing jazz gigs all the time. And so he was sort of like an elite athlete, but not playing that way. It was all music, but just really at the top of his game with the
I,
chops and
I
taste.
sat in with Sonny Greenwich in Montreal once, and it
Oh
was a
yeah.
little disappointed because he just seemed to want to play A minor for a long period of time.
He was one of
And
the few people that could actually make that work, though. He came up with some really cool things on modal vamps and things
yeah,
like
I wasn't disappointed by him. I was disappointed by
that.
me.
Yeah.
But
Oh, but the interesting thing about Sonny was he would play. He had a very eclectic taste in standards when he chose to play them. Like he played one time, he played "The Look of Love," which is a beautiful tune, as a Latin tune. He played this tune called "The Tin Man" by this pop group called America. He played "My Cherie Amour" by
Stevie Wonder,
yeah, which is a beautiful tune.
it is a
He
nice
played
tune.
this other beautiful
Joe
tune.
Farrell used to play that.
Yeah, okay, yeah. And he used to play this tune. He recorded it on CBC, "As Long as I'm Dreaming." He played "How Are Things in Glockamora." He played like a really wide cross section of tunes, and then he would
Oh,
do the modal thing. He would do this thing called "The World Is Full of Beautiful Things" or something. It was like a ba 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 da ba 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 da ba. It's like a fast 6/8 kind of D
like a
modal.
green sleeves type of feeling.
Well, yeah, kind of, yeah. But it was like after a while, it wasn't even D minor. It was like D question mark. It was like a D pedal, and he would just superimpose all these different things on top. And he sounded, when he was on form, he sounded amazing. And he had a very unique sound on guitar. I remember he played through this tiny little amplifier, a tube amp, and it was overloading. It was distorting, and he sort of sounded like a saxophone, except he was playing the guitar. He had that really kind of raspy uh,
Huh.
sound. Was really, really cool. And really at the time, like nobody was doing anything like that. And of
Huh.
course, and Lenny, nobody was playing like Lenny, and nobody was playing like Ed. All the three of them were just so unique in their own way,
They were
and
unique.
all equally beautiful, just different,
Now, two other influences I wanted to ask you about that I've heard in your playing. I mean, I can't talk to Lorne Lofsky without talking about Bill Evans.
Oh my
I
God.
mean, we've mentioned that. Did you ever have, I mean, I learned so much about Bill Evans through playing with you. I mean,
Oh,
I had been kind of studying Bill for quite a while, but you had certain insights into, I would hear what the way you were using his approach, especially the secondary dominant type of substitutions and those kind
yeah,
of.
I really like those. Yeah, yeah. Well, they're pretty commonplace now. I mean, you use those things all the time too. But he
But
was one of the first people I heard though that would reharmonize tunes in a very personal way. That would always made it sound like that's how the tune should be played. It's like
yeah, and
it's almost he wrote it, but he didn't. He didn't. I mean, he wrote great tunes, but
did you have any personal relationship with Bill?
no, I would have given almost anything to have played with him. I heard him a couple times in Toronto, one at Basin Street, and then once actually twice at Basin Street, which was a club right above Bourbon Street. It was upstairs. I heard him with Elliot Zygmunt and Eddie Gomez.
Right.
And I heard him his last trio with Mark Johnson and Joe LaBarba years later. And both, especially the last time I heard him, that to me was a revelation. Like when he would take tunes and halfway through the tune he would modulate to another key, and I had never even occurred to me before to do anything like that. Like he
Hmm.
did that with Wine and Roses and a bunch of other tunes.
I heard him do that with that. I heard him do it with Emily.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
he did it on a lot of tunes later on, and like he would play an intro to some, or he did it in with Emily too. He would play an intro one key, and then he would set up another key. And anyway, just brilliant, and his choice of harmony to support. But he always came up with chords that wouldn't bury the melody or get in the way of the melody. It would bring out the beauty of the
they
melody.
enhanced the melody. He did.
Exactly, exactly.
No way to
And
do
that's
that.
that's something that I really learned that really influenced me and does to this day, looking for chord changes on, because when you play a tune, you want to learn sort of the changes that most people would play in case you find yourself in a situation where you're at a jam session or like a pickup jazz gig and you don't have time to say, well, here, play this, turn around and do this and do that. But then it's nice to dig deeper and come up with different ways and different keys, potentially. And so that's one thing that I really learned a lot about. Also, the way he voiced things and the way he connected the chords and the subtlety with which he would play the chords. Like he would play the melody, and when he comped, it sounded like somebody else was playing. And Keith Jarrett does that too. The ability to sort of to create not differences, but to create contrast between the lead voice and the supporting harmony, and to have that kind of control, and then of course the whole harmonic rhythmic thing with the displacement of the harmony and coming in at surprise places and then changing the chord qualities too, not just with secondary dominance, but so yeah, I mean, I owe Ed Bickert and Bill Evans a debt I could never repay.
Yeah.
Just put it that way. Just
I also hear some Jim Hall.
Oh yeah, for sure.
In you, that's another influence that I.
Absolutely, yeah. For a while, like when I was a teenager and I was just into like blues and stuff like that. I remember the first time I heard this tune, Crossroads by Cream, Eric Clapton and Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce. And the first time I heard it, I remember the hair on the back of my head stood up. I just thought, man, this is some serious shit. When I was a teenager, I wanted to be a blues player,
So this was your first music? I mean,
yeah, well, like pop music, the Beatles and stuff like that. And then Cream came on the scene, and then, Zeppelin and blah, blah, Hendrix and all that. And then around that time, I was starting to get a little bit into jazz, but when I was 16, I wanted to be Eric Clapton, and then I heard Ed Bickert and Jim Hall, and then I wanted to be Ed Bickert, and then I wanted to be Jim Hall, and then I heard Bill Evans, and then I couldn't be. I wasn't a piano player, but I've been fortunate. I've had all these very quite varied influences.
Right. So you were seriously. What I mean to say is, you were seriously immersed in music.
Oh yeah.
But that was like '60s rock, you would say.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And that kind of thing. Yeah. Let's just backtrack for a minute. You grew up in Toronto.
Yeah.
And Jewish family, brothers and sisters.
I have one sister that's 7 years older, but I'm the only one in my entire family that actually plays an instrument.
How did that come about? Like, what was your first idea to play music?
Well, actually, I had a really good friend at the time, and as a fluke for something for him to do, his parents bought him a guitar, and I thought, well, it'd be cool to have a guitar. So my parents took me down to this pawn shop at Church and Queen. Do you remember Betty's Booze Can?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, right at the corner of that street, right on the corner of that intersection, there was a place called Henry and Company, and it was just a pawn shop. That used to be Pawnbrokers Row.
And yeah, I kind of remember that in Toronto.
Yeah, there was McTamney's and George Kindness and Henry. Anyway, Henry and Company is now Henry's Cameras, which is a big chain across Canada. It's just a camera store, very good store. But at the time, they sold watches, microscopes, china, amplifiers, guitars. Anyway, my parents took me in there, and they bought me this guitar. It was $16. It was this piece. I used to call it a baseball bat with strings. It was the biggest piece of junk. And it didn't even have a truss rod, like no metal rod on the neck. So eventually the neck would like lift up, So. And the funny thing was, I played not long ago with an ex-student of mine at this club in Toronto called the Emmett Ray. And this was such a weird evening. I walked in there and they had a piano because they'd have different bands there. And sitting on top of the piano was a guitar. And sometimes, places will hang saxophones and things that are probably not playable for ambiance to create an atmosphere. They'd have a guitar hanging up or whatever. So this guitar is sitting on the piano, and I went, oh my God, that's the same guitar my parents bought me when I was a kid. It was the same model.
You remember the brand?
Yeah, it was called Grange. It was made in Czechoslovakia and had a little stamp inside it. It was the same guitar. And I thought, this is weird. I'm playing with an ex-student of mine, and there's my first guitar sitting on. So that was one thing that happened that night. And then another thing happened. This couple came in, and for my bar mitzvah, not my parents, but some family friend bought me this. Remember the Polaroid cameras where it almost looked like an 8-track cartridge? and you put the cartridge in, and then you take a photo, and then you pull out the photo, and right before your eyes, these chemicals develop. Do you remember those?
I remember them very well. The
Well, they
Instamatic.
brought, yeah, well, they brought them back apparently. And this young couple that was listening to myself and Oliver, my student, they had this camera there, and they said, "Can we take a picture of you and your student?" I said, "Sure." They pulled out this camera. I went, "That's the second thing from my youth." I said, "When I was 13, I got that for a gift." And there was another thing that happened that night. I can't remember now, but they say things happen in threes. And anyway, it was so weird, man. But to see my very first guitar sitting on the piano, like decades later, and I'm playing with the next student of mine.
You know what's funny about those cameras, the Instamatics?
Yeah.
What's weird? I had a couple pictures that I'd saved from my Instamatics, and one was of an old love of mine, who is not. She died, not when I was with her, many years later.
Yeah.
But she was a strong memory for me, and I still had a couple. I was going through my things, and I had a couple of photos of her that were taken with this Instamatic, and I had it in an album for a long time, and then I hadn't looked at it for about 10 years, and I finally did take a picture of it with a regular camera.
Right.
So I have a remnant of the picture,
yeah.
Because what was happening to the photograph, which I didn't realize, in time, it was fading away. Yeah. Little by little, pieces of the photograph from the bottom up were starting to just become white again.
Wow.
Become blank, and it was like very, like death and decay, and it was a strange moment where I realized I'll say, well, at least I'll have that photo forever. And then I realized, probably another 5-10 years, there won't be anything left to the photo. It will.
No, yeah, so you digitized it. Yeah, you took it with your cell phone, I guess, right?
Yeah, so then I digitized it, but I didn't realize because, you really thought they were forever, which also reminds me of, I had one of the first Sony TC55 Walkman tape recorders. They weren't even called Walkman yet, I don't believe.
Yeah.
They were one of the first cassette recorders like that.
Yeah.
And music was so expendable that I would take one tape and I'd record a gig. I'd listen to what I played or what the band played that night. Then I'd use the same tape to record the next gig and record over it.
Yeah.
So I did that with about 25 gigs of Chet Baker.
Oh, wow.
It was just music. It was only, hey, when it's gone, it's gone.
It's you to have separate tapes. Yeah, man.
And you're saving money, so you can buy drugs, or whatever you're doing with it. Wow. But you're saving money and you don't buy another tape, so there were still a few, but, we didn't think of recording. Nowadays, everybody, if somebody sneezes, it's recorded. Everybody, the young generation, record everything, every note they play, everything they do.
And there's people putting out stuff on YouTube and Facebook or whatever of them just noodling on stuff. And I see it occasionally, and I think to myself, why are they doing this? I mean, maybe they're doing it for likes and attention or recognition or to feed their ego. I don't really know. But I mean, a lot of the stuff, some of the stuff is good, but one of the things I'm hearing lately is like the idea of music is starting to become like an Olympic event.
Like a what?
Like the Olympics. Like I see people post things on the guitar where they're playing at Warp 9 or saxophone players that don't play any of their own shit. They're playing along with a Michael Brecker solo or something.
Yeah.
People are constantly emulating other people, and it's usually stuff that's very technically oriented. It's very rare that I'll hear somebody play something that actually has some, depth and
note to note value.
Yeah. I mean, it's it's weird. Like there's and I don't know. Like there's this there's like a bunch of guitar players that they lift Chick Corea piano solos that are played at the speed of light, and they play along with the recording. And what is the reaction that somebody's supposed to have? I guess a lot of people would say, well, that's really impressive. I hear that and I go like, well, why don't you just play something of your own? And maybe while you're doing it, maybe play a few less notes.
Well, I think
things have really
that's
changed.
Where singing, you see, I bet that they don't sing with the record. if you sing with it, then you get the real value
Yeah.
of what the feeling is
Yeah.
without an instrument to, and, I really think that if Lester Young, who pound for pound, he's like Sugar Ray Robinson, I mean, including Bird, there was never a better improviser or, than Lester Young. But, I mean, if he were to walk into a session and play These Foolish Things, nobody would be that impressed. They'd say, well, he didn't really do very much. He changed the melody, he played some beauty, but it's all about loud, high, and fast.
And people sounding like they're getting paid by the note or something like that. Actually, the other day I saw this girl. I don't remember her name. It doesn't matter who it was. This is just a general observation about the way I see things these days, or what I've have been seeing. This girl, she says, I'm playing. It's a countdown. John Coltrane's solo on Countdown, and she's playing it on piano, and she's doing it in octaves, right? And she's literally playing with the record, and like technically it's perfect. And she's looking every once in a while, and she's not reading it, obviously. She must have ridiculous pitch. And every once in a while she looks at the camera, and the look on her face is so nonchalant. She might as well be filing her nails. Like there's absolutely no music. She's like a sort of a circus act, the Flying Zambinis or something.
You sent me that, and you said, "Yeah, iRobot."
Yeah,
you called it I.
Yeah. That's what I mean.
It looked like artificial intelligence.
Exactly, man. And I'm thinking, like, I'd rather, she's obviously got great ears and she's got a lot of technique. I don't know how much musicality she's got. She can certainly replicate what she hears, but it'd be really refreshing to hear her play her own solo on Countdown without necessarily sounding like a robot. I mean, I thought this music is supposed to be about individuals' perspective. We all have influences, of course, but the idea is that, for every dollar that you play, you want to have 5 cents that's your own.
Well, it's what I've been looking at some interviews with Artie Shaw lately, and what a brilliant guy he was. He really had a lot of really opinions that are really valid and everlasting.
Yeah.
And he was talking about competition and the whole idea of like polls and all this kind of thing. But this kind of thing, I could include what you're talking about with this girl. He says it's just plain wrong thinking. It's just a wrong way to think. Yeah. That being faster and playing somebody else's stuff as faster or faster than Coltrane played it is going to really show you or the world anything.
Yeah.
Anything new.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I try and tell my students, like I've lifted about 5 or 6 solos in my life, and I lifted some of Ed's solos. I never wrote them down. I lifted one solo by Bill. I lifted a solo by Kirk. That was a great solo. I lifted one solo by George Coleman on a minor blues. And I think that was probably it. But anyway, I tell my students, when you learn a solo, you don't want to. I said, if you went to a jam session and they call the tune, let's say you learned a Bud Powell solo on Cherokee or something. It's a killer solo. But if you learn to play it, you guys are playing Cherokee. What are you going to play? Are you going to play? If you could play a solo, are you going to play his solo, or are you going to play your solo? And then sometimes they think like, well, I think it'd be really cool if I played Bud's solo. I said, you're missing the whole point of transcribing. You transcribe to learn the conceptual ideas that spawn with the musical ideas.
Yeah, I mean, that's what.
Forget about them, and then you let the shit come out all of its own accord. And there'll be some repetition of phrases and stuff, but it's not going to be verbatim. You don't want to play somebody's solo verbatim. That's like you or I going out on a stage and say, to be or not to be. And people are going to say, well, wait a minute. That was done. That's been done.
Yeah.
You're doing like going out and you're quoting Shakespeare directly and you're claiming it as your own. That's very wrong. And that's the antithesis of what we are trying to do. Right? You take us like Bill Evans, one of the things that I admire about him, because Bill didn't have perfect pitch. What he did was he said he never had a great talent for mimicry. he said what he did was he listened to all these people that he idolized or people that he thought were amazing players, and he checked out their styles, and he disassembled what they did, and he put his style based on things that he heard them play from a conceptual standpoint. And it was like a bricklayer building a wall. He put his style together, brick by brick, stone by stone, and you could hear bits of Oscar Peterson, you could hear bits of Wynton Kelly, bits of Monk, bits of this, bits of that. And but
Sonny
when
Clark,
you hear,
yeah.
yeah, but when you hear him play, you know what you hear? You hear Bill.
Yeah, well, that's
You
what
know what I mean?
we aspire to. You know, I mean, I was watching Christopher Walken. He's a funny cat, man.
Yeah,
There's some interviews with him, and this is a man who really knows not to take life too seriously
right.
and really has a good time. Man, if I could have some coffee with him, I think it would be a beneficial
Yeah,
and
yeah,
fun
yeah.
experience. But what he said was funny. They asked him about everybody imitates you. He said, yeah, he said, you know, I've heard, I guess most comics and a lot of actors do me and this and that. He said, you want to hear something funny? He says, though, I can't imitate anybody else. I don't know how.
Well,
I
there you
can't.
go, man.
I tried doing Marlon Brando. It doesn't come out. I tried
Yeah,
doing somebody else. I can't. I can only do me. He's
yeah.
like,
It's like that tune that Sammy Davis sang years ago. I gotta
I
be
gotta be
me.
me.
I gotta be me.
Yeah,
What else can I be but who I
I
am?
am. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'll go it alone if that's
yeah,
how it must be. How can I be right for somebody else when I'm not right for me? And
yeah. It's great, but it's so
Gloria
true.
Loring, listen, there's the name.
Oh yeah. Oh,
She
I've
had
never
the
heard of
hit.
it.
The
Oh, did
first
she?
hit was a
Okay.
girl named Gloria Loring who did it on the. I remember her doing it on the Griffin Show.
Okay.
I don't know where that came from.
Yeah.
Rollins told me he didn't copy either. He said he learned Coleman Hawkins' Body and Soul. He learned a couple of Lester solos with Basie. And then he learned the heads to when Bird tunes came out. He would learn the heads to all the Bird tunes because they would play
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
And then he said he didn't call it deconstructing, but that's because I asked Sonny that. I was very curious
Yeah.
as how much he had actually lifted.
Right.
And he said there were sometimes he did play a whole solo because he wanted to feel what it was like to play the whole solo.
That's that's a good point. Like, let's say somebody's got a pretty average time feel, or it's staccato, or it's stiff, or something. So I would say to somebody, why don't you learn Wynton Kelly's solo, for example, on Freddie Freeloader? That to me is like a perfect example of in the pocket playing, beautiful eighth notes, beautiful length on the note, articulation up the yin yang. I said, what you do is you learn the solo, you play along with the record, and you record yourself playing it with the record, and you try and play it so there's no flams. Now, the thing is, when you play Freddie Freeloader on a blues with those chord changes, because there's that flat seven dominant or whatever, at the in the
Do
first.
dee do do.
Yeah. But anyway, but apart from that, but the idea is you learn how to be able to turn on that time feel without playing that solo. But you learn
Dee
how
da
to,
do dit.
yeah,
Dee da dee da.
yeah. I mean, it's perfect. I mean,
Yeah.
the timing on it and the sound, just the beautiful comping, very sparse comping, occasional chord melody stuff. I mean, it's got everything. So you learn the solo, you learn how to play it with the record, then you forget it, but then you're able to play on any other tune with that kind of poppy time feel because
Right. See,
the
you're teaching.
physicality that's involved, right?
Well, see, that's a beautiful thing, Lauren, because that way you're teaching the feeling. You're not just teaching notes.
Yeah,
Last night I gave a trumpet player a lesson, and this cat really has a lot of trouble locking into time, the same kind of thing.
yeah,
So I've got him singing Lester Young's Sometimes I'm Happy solo.
right,
And I found that he could play it on trumpet because there's not big register skips.
right.
And just to understand, ba da 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 dee, boo dee ba doo ba doo be da doo dee da 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 boo doo dee. To just the idea of paraphrase and the idea of where he puts those notes and how they swing without a lot of technical demands.
Yeah. And
I would tell tenor players, man, learn Lester's solo. It's going to teach you more than learning countdown.
oh, absolutely.
About the essence of jazz.
Well, because countdown, there's no rhythm in countdown. It's for the most part, it's pretty much like eighth notes. There's a couple of places where there's some there's some space, but like something like that, or the Wynton Kelly solo, you're learning about articulation, you're learning about note placement, you're learning about rhythm, you're learning about the longer phrase. You're not going you're going boo boo ba doo ba ah boo ba. You're learning how to play one note in front of the other, and then knowing when to leave enough space so it sounds like you're going from one thought, one musical thought to another musical thought. So you're going from like words to sentences to paragraphs to stories, a bit at a time, So anyway, it's really it's interesting. Teaching is really interesting to try and convey that. I mean, time and rhythm is everything. You could play all these notes that have got nothing to do with the chords you're playing on, but if you resolve them properly and play something that's rhythmically imaginative, it sounds great. Jerry Bergonzi did a clinic at Humber College a few years ago, and he played the solo. I think he was playing on Solar or something, and he played this really out solo, and we all said, "Man, that's incredible solo." He said, "What were you thinking about anything when you were doing it?" He said, I was playing every note that didn't work with the chord and trying to pay attention to how it was, where it was starting and stopping." And he was doing it organically. Of course, he wasn't thinking when he was doing it. But so it was a great lesson knowing that, you could take all these notes, like I've been playing through these Bach fugues, and you hear these lines are going along, and if you did a freeze frame on one interval or one group clump of 2 or 3 notes, you'd say that is so dissonant, that is so unusable. But then you hear what came before and where it's going, and you go, it's so amazing, right? Because it's all contextual. It's not, if you look at individual things on their own, sometimes you go like, that doesn't make any sense. But then you hear what came before and what comes after, and you go, it's beautiful. It's part of a larger thing.
It's just teaching people that also part of it is saying, I have people like say, okay, look, basically, you've got to negotiate this chord change, and it's a 2-5-1. It's in this key. Right. First, just play some diatonic notes. See if you can make pretty melodies just using the notes of the scale and trying to swing.
Yeah.
The next thing is try using notes that aren't part of the scale and see where they take you.
Exactly.
And just you're basically still just thinking 2-5-1 to F, but now you've got B natural and G sharp and D flat and E flat and all these notes available to you.
Yeah.
And I find that the thing, it's like what Tatum told Don Byas, I'm paraphrasing, is he told him something similar to that. He said the main thing is, though, don't stop. When you hear something that doesn't sound right,
keep going.
Don't stop.
Yeah, well,
go on.
That's what the resolution is. Yeah, I've been talking about stuff with students for a long time. I sort of call them upper structure guide tones. If you're playing a D minor chord and then you hit an A, and then the A can go up to the B flat on the G chord, and then of course resolve up to the B. So you get the 5, sharp 9 major 7, or it goes the other way.
Yeah, I call them harmonic voice leading lines.
It's the same. Yeah,
the same idea.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so you can cover a lot of stuff in that regard in terms of. I guess didn't George Russell use this expression tonal gravity or something like that? Where notes have a certain. They're predisposed to moving certain ways within a chord progression. If you want to get a very smooth motion, you take advantage of that, and that's.
Or you could call it targets.
Exactly.
They move to certain targets.
I use that.
When I was 18, I met Jackie Byard. I guess I was maybe 17, but I went to New England Conservatory, not as a student, but I actually had a friend that was going there whose roommate was with a show band, and he was away all the time. So, of course, I just moved into Jordan Hall and lived with my friend, David, who was a flute player, and they had pianos in the basement. So any hour of the day and night you could practice there. It was a perfect environment. But the story I'm thinking is then, since I was so ensconced in the school, and I even got to meet Gunther Schuller, because Ed Schuller and I became friends. Ed was still in high school, but I would come over and spend the weekend at Gunther Schuller's house teaching Ed, because I was a little older, a little more advanced.
Yeah.
And so the story being, there was a teacher at the school. I lived in the dorm, so I, of course, would talk to the students. and they'd tell me the hippest teachers and who was teaching an interesting class
Right.
and this kind of thing. And this ties in with Bach. There was a fellow named Ernst Oester,
Okay.
and Ernst Oester taught a course in Schenkerian analysis,
Wow.
which is basically you follow the journey of certain notes
Okay.
through a piece. Like you analyze it in terms of line. Like in other words, if Bach goes ba da 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 dee da dee da 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 da, that's really just the D going to the C sharp,
Okay.
and the other notes, and the B flat going to the da 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 dee da dee 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 da do da, which is really like the flat nine of the dominant,
Mm-hmm.
leading you to D minor. So you've gone from like A to B flat, back to the A, and then D to the C sharp, back to the D. Those are two moving lines in it.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this whole thing this guy Shankar developed on how to analyze it, a lot of which I've forgotten. But the thing that I did was I ended up applying it to bebop. I would take Bird and Bud Powell solos and Perez solos, and then like phrase by phrase, I'd say, if Bird is playing ba ba da dee da do da da ba 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 da ba da, he's going da 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 da. That's the subtext.
Yeah.
So anyway, this guy taught a class. I chased him around, found out he ate lunch at a place called Ann's Cafeteria. And they had a great fig square there. I remember that. And so I saw him eating lunch, and I followed him around because the students were saying what a great class it was. And I said, Herr Oster, do you think I could, I never told him I wasn't a student there, but I don't have your class. But do you think I could come and audit your class? And he was like, sure, So I took this class, and he was analyzing the Bach cello suites
Ooh.
as played by Pablo Casal. So twice a week, the class met and did this analysis of how Bach was using the importance of note to note. In other words, it really was just what we're talking about. And seeing, and I saw the parallel there, when I said, oh, this works for Bach, so it's got to work for Bird. And it did, it was like right in there. So I'm saying,
yeah, that's amazing. Have you seen, have you ever played through, it'd be harder on the saxophone because it's like literally wall to wall notes. There's a violin concerto, Perpetual Motion.
Moto Perpetuo.
That's the one.
Yeah, I had Michael Rabin.
Moto.
Yeah,
I've played through that. I mean, I can play it, but I mean, it's ridiculous. I don't think there's one rest in it.
Well, I sure can't play it now with emphysema. I'll tell you that.
Oh, I know. But what I was going to say was the first time I hacked my way through it very slowly, very, very slowly. I was looking at it, went, this is bebop. There's bebop. It's, you hear ba ba da ba do ba do ba da ba da ba da da da. Like all the stuff that's in there is from the mid to late 1800s, and it's many decades before Bird and Diz, and there's bebop in there.
Yeah, in fact, it's closer to Coltrane in the sense that it's even, the rhythms aren't broken up. It's even, just the even eighth note. A friend of mine had an interesting theory about the idea of the broken notes and the rhythmically. What I did, actually, there's a beautiful version of that Moto Perpetuo by a violinist named Michael Rabin.
Okay.
Rabin. He died young, but he was like one of those real amazing geniuses, and he really puts the music in it. Because I've heard violinists play it, and it's the same kind of thing. It just sounds like notes.
That's another, yeah. I mean, in the wrong hands, that's going to sound like that girl that played Countdown. It's going to just sound like AI,
Right, but this guy Rabin, he really played it as music. It was great, and that's a theory that a buddy of mine had, named Kent Glenn, who's also no longer with us. Mm-hmm. But he said, you realize, he said, in the day, Bird and Don Byas were the two most modern saxophone players, most harmonically advanced. In fact, what's interesting is on Bird's record of Coco, on side 2, is not Bird. It's Don Byas playing
Oh,
How High the Moon
okay.
on the same 78 record.
Oh, that's interesting. I had no idea.
I got a copy of that.
Wow.
Um, so, and if you think about it, if you listen to Don Byas, like if you think of the stuff with Slam Stewart, for example, which is very well known, the I Got Rhythm in Indiana.
Yeah.
Yeah, and very consistently, the eighth notes are nonstop. He's not creating rhythmically the way Bird would phrase. Bird would play long lines too, but there was a lot more breaking up at the time,
Yeah.
and contrast to it. So, Kent said in those days, he was a teenager, the musicians would kind of argue about which direction to take. Some played, not argue, but some would play a more consistently eighth note oriented line,
Right.
and others
Yeah.
would be played breaking up the time more.
Yeah.
He said, but he feels in the end, Don Byas won because Coltrane played a less broken up kind of line and more of the consistent eighth note thing.
That's very true. Yeah.
And more people were playing that approach
Right.
and are playing that approach these days. Because after people like my friend Mike Brecker and guys that came out of Train, and that, especially the Countdown Giant Steps period of Train,
Yeah.
played almost, that was more the tradition of Don Byas than it was Bird.
Right. Okay. Interesting. Yeah.
So that's an interesting
Like two schools really, right?
schools of that. I mean, they're both beautiful, but
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the important things, I think one of the responsibilities that any musician has is to like keep an open mind and check out different ways of playing and check out players that are playing. There's so many different subsets of jazz now too. I mean, God, if you ask several different people what they thought jazz was, you'd probably get several different explanations, takes on it. But I think it's great to check out players that approach things differently. I mean, I sometimes I love when Sonny Rollins when he would do that really rhythmic stuff, like boo doo bop boo bip boo bop boo boo, and then he'd start playing a bunch of eighth notes. But I love the way he would break things up with playing a lot of notes on up.
yeah, me too. I stole a lot of that. Not note by note, but that concept,
yeah, like on I know that like on Sunny Side Up, I mean, when you
well, that's that contrast right there.
like the stop time thing.
Yeah.
On I know that when they go it's I mean it sounds we have to be able to create a lot of contrast when we play. Like if everything is staccato and broken up, after a while that's too much, and then if you play wall to wall notes, that's too much. Somewhere in between is the happy marriage between those two.
Well, there's a balance that Sonny achieved, I would say.
Yeah.
Especially in the years from 1956, 57, through the time he took off, and through the mid 60s,
Right. Yeah.
that nobody was really doing. And I guess that, we have covered a lot. I just want to talk to you a little bit about Kirk MacDonald.
Yeah.
And how I jammed with Virginia. She came over to my house last week, his daughter.
Yeah. She sort of sounds like her father, except on the clarinet.
She does, doesn't she?
Yeah. Well, I mean, she grew up like from day one hearing Kirk practice 85 hours a day. And I'm sure a lot of it's permeated her musical content. She's really happening. She's worked very hard.
And you and Kirk are playing, that's your basic band these days. Most of the gigs you play are with Kirk these days?
Well, actually, Kirk's been ill, he's been out of commission.
That's right. I mean,
actually, I just heard he's back playing now. I just heard a clip of him last night at this place called the Black Bear, where I've played with him fairly extensively over the last couple of years. He was sounding killing, man. He's back practicing and stuff. He's got his strength back, which is great to see.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, but he and I, we go back like 40 plus years, and we've logged a lot of hours together playing, and I look forward to playing with him again. He's been an influence on me too, like through the Tristano thing, and as you were as well. Like I was saying earlier, I've got many fond memories of playing with you and George, and we would play some Tristano tunes and tunes with that kind of approach on standards and stuff like that. So that was a real eye and ear opener for me way back. And Kirk was sort of along on the same bandwagon too.
Yeah, I remember those Sunday afternoons at the Pilot too, with the quartet that we had.
Yeah. I remember. Do you remember you and I would sometimes we would play the Pilot, we would play Myers Deli, the after hours thing, and then we would play Quigley's in the Beaches, and I used to call that the Toronto World Tour. And I think for all 4 gigs in total, we made about $320 or something.
If that, yeah, something
Yeah,
like that. Yeah.
Joke, yeah. But it was so much fun. Got so many fond memories of playing with you back then, man. And the Rex too.
Yeah, we had.
That was part of the Downtown World Tour too. We do the Rex, then we do after hours at Myers, and then we do the Pilot matinee, and then we do Quigley's on Sunday.
Yeah, that was how I. And I'd take off for Europe again.
Yeah.
So. But when I was in Toronto, I'd do the Toronto World Tour with you and Fabio, and
Yeah, those were the days, man. That was a very special time.
There were, and an interesting thing about Toronto too is that, just in closing, is that the cats that stayed up there and, not being under the pressure of New York and having to play what's supposedly hip. See, now with the internet, that's changed a lot too, because you have cats playing what they think are hip. There was cats that didn't really, like Kirk had his influences, you had your influences, you had this, but you weren't really that much on keeping up. What happened last week in New York? I want to play like that.
Yeah,
Canadians didn't care about that.
Yeah, a big thing these days with not all guitar players, but a lot of guitar players, has been for years, is like using a pedal board. You got all these foot pedals to give you different sounds and stuff like that. And I'm not a snob or anything, but the music, the way I hear it, even if stuff that's adventurous harmonically and rhythmically and stuff, I hear the guitar just straight into an amplifier. I like the sound of conventional guitar into an amp, and I'm definitely not swayed by whatever the current fads are. I'm trying to be true to the whatever musical journey that I'm on, and I'm
So you have been, and it's admirable. I've always admired that about you. And,
well, it's just something that, well, you're the same, we're cut from the same cloth, and
we try to be, so anyway, it's been a real pleasure talking to Lorne Lofsky today.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, Bob.
And thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and we go back. Actually, how many years? This is something. 40 years anyway.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah. I can't believe that, eh? It's hard to believe.
I can't either.
How old are you now?
I'm 72.
Okay. Well, I'm going to be 71 this May. So, yeah, we're the same vintage.
Yeah, I'll be 73 in March. So.
Okay. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, hang in there, man.
You too. We both had hair. You had more. I still had.
That expression, hair today, gone tomorrow?
Yes. And very true.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you very much.
Okay,
we've really had a pleasure talking to Lorne Lofsky.
Yeah.
And I'd like to remind people that have been enjoying our conversation here to please give us a like and subscribe. It costs nothing to subscribe. And though it doesn't seem like much, it means a lot to us. It keeps us going. We've done around 75 or 76 of these podcasts with great musicians. And, it's really, I think, very important in preserving the history of jazz music as it occurs these days. And if you're interested in that and in our endeavor of making this music stay alive and work, please like us and subscribe. And I'd like to thank Jessy Kaiser for her production work and helping us get organized with all this. And once again, great thanks to Lorne Lofsky, the great Lorne Lofsky. And
my pleasure.
Hope we get to play together again.
I hope so. Yeah. Anyway, all the best.
All the best.
Okay. Take care.
Goodbye, everybody. God bless you.